AI Realized, the podcast about everything that is new, now, and next for enterprise executives deploying AI. Hosted by myself, Christina Elwood, and my collaborator, David Yakovovich.
Our guests will share what's driving AI adoption, use cases, and business models for the data and AI economy.
Why the future is bright.
Welcome to AI Realized, the podcast for enterprise executives leading AI deployments. From tackling security, data, and operational challenges to navigating organizational transformation, AI deployment offers a unique opportunity to redesign organizations from the inside out. I'm Christina Elwood, your host for today's episode, and we're talking today with Kevin Petrie, the VP of Research at BARC Research. Kevin, welcome to AI Realized.
Thanks, Christina. Great to be here.
It's so nice to see you, Kevin. I'd love to just start off with a little bit of background about your excitement around AI. You're a data analyst and now an AI and data analyst. So tell me about what excites you about AI.
Sure. So my role here at BARC, which is a global research and consulting firm, is to lead the data management practice, looking across research, consulting, and also end user events that we have in Europe and in the US. And I think that what's fascinating is that we're tracking what's happening with organizations in terms of adopting AI, and we're also continuing to refine what we do in response to AI. So I'm living it. I'm seeing more and more people in my personal life and my family who are impacted positively and negatively by AI. And there's really no better time to look at the fundamentals of data management because that holds the key to AI success. So it's a very interesting time, and I'm pretty excited to be here and talk about some of the business implications of artificial intelligence, provided you have safe and effective data management.
Yeah, data is obviously at the heart of it all, isn't it?
It really is, yeah.
Yeah. Before we dive into the data side of it, let's talk a little bit about the organizational challenges, because this is a little bit of an unusual technology in that it requires a cultural change in the organization. And it does, in fact, give us the opportunity to redesign how our organizations are operating. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the transformation area, and then we can talk about data.
Sure. Yeah, I think that we have at BARC, we have the benefit of doing a lot of qualitative research based on consulting, based on various end user conversations with data leaders and AI leaders. And we also look at quantitatively what's happening. We did find in a recent survey that the number 2 obstacle to success with AI is skills, a lack of AI skills within the organization. And so in response to this challenge, so many organizations are looking at retraining workers, hiring, which can be expensive if you want the right AI savvy folks, and showcasing positive use cases, best practices, and so forth through centers of excellence. So there are a lot of ways in which organizations are getting serious about evangelizing the use of AI and also educating their workers about how to use it effectively.
Trust is also at the center of that cultural change, isn't it? Talk a little bit about what you're hearing from leaders about the issue of trust with their customers, with their employees, and even with their board in terms of mitigating risk and ensuring that the company is able to move forward in a way that is.
Yeah, it is interesting because the latest numbers from marketing firms are that overall Fortune 500 companies have higher levels of brand loyalty with their customers than ever before. So that's pretty good times. And obviously, organizations such as MasterCard and Apple and so forth are going to be very protective of those customer relationships and make sure that they don't overstep the risks or overstep the bounds of what these trusted relationships can involve. I do see leaders that are doing the right things with AI. They have governance programs, they have executive leadership, they have education and retraining and so forth, taking increasingly bold steps about the ways in which they're starting to play with their customer relationships. MasterCard is a good example with their agent pay offering, which is starting to help some of their customers shop, peruse options, make decisions, and even process transactions. So MasterCard is starting to play with the crown jewels, and it'll be very interesting to see how that pans out in terms of the level of trust and the trusted relationships they have with their customers. But I think the good news for a lot of longstanding data people is that they have been advising executives for decades that data governance needs more investment. Data quality is a longstanding challenge, as are privacy risks and so forth. So all these aspects of data governance that really get to trust have not been getting enough attention. But I think executives at the CEO level and at the board level are starting to realize that AI can have some spectacular problems if you don't double down on the on the data fundamentals. So in a sense, this can be a good time for data people to have sort of a renaissance in redoubling and extending their governance programs to address those risks and make sure they have clean inputs for AI models.
Aside from having your data be clean and prepared for the models, how does governance help you to prevent errors of the AI, either whether they're hallucinations or they're just maybe misguided rather than absolutely wrong? How does data governance help you with that? And what are you seeing as best practices?
Yeah, it's interesting. There aren't easy answers. If we look at traditional data governance, which is not a discipline that many companies would claim to have mastered at this point, there are the traditional risks I mentioned: data quality, data privacy, protection of intellectual property are some of the big ones. Organizations need to extend from that domain into the domain of models, figuring out how to make sure that models have predictions and outputs that are clean, that are safe. They also need to move to a third domain now, which is agents, and figuring out how to make sure that agents' behavior does not go rogue, does not have subversive intentions. Large popular language models out there right now, such as OpenAI has been very forthright and said, look, if we found that our reasoning models, if monitored too closely by humans, will start to try to deceive humans and will try to hide what they're doing. There are other models out there that will rewrite their own code in order to avoid being shut down. So those are some big challenges that organizations need to figure out how to address from a governance perspective. What we do find, if we take a peek at what tech companies are doing, software companies whose crown jewels are based on automation and AI, the number one control they use for AI governance is humans, human in the loop. And I think that's a very good best practice. If you have smart, vigilant employees who are safeguarding and approving outputs before they go into the wild, that's the safest way to make sure that you're not undermining trust with customers and the public.
Do you envision that AI governance and AI model management will move into the purview of the data governance team? Or do you see those as complementary but different?
I think that those programs need to be addressed comprehensively, and we do see organizations starting to embrace that notion. You have chief data officers that are trying to play catch up, I think, at this point. They've been managing data governance programs for some time. They're partnering with chief AI officers, chief analytics officers, so that they can have data engineers, data stewards working with data scientists, working with ML engineers in order to address these risks in a more comprehensive and holistic way. And when they get into the agentic realm, they need to work with AI savvy developers who are building the workflows and building the applications. So I do see organizations, the advanced cutting edge ones, starting to blend their teams and bring them together. And you can start to see it a lot of the job descriptions on LinkedIn and elsewhere. If you see a data engineer job opening, it's going to have some machine learning in there. If you see a data scientist job opening, it's going to have some data engineering in there. And that's as it should be.
And are you seeing the agents being developed by the technical teams, or are they being developed by business people who maybe don't have a relationship with the data team?
Great question. We're at an interesting point. There are vendors that are rightly understanding that agentic AI is a highly complex, daunting endeavor for organizations. And so we have some clients here at BARC, Boomi, and Data IQ that are helping companies build out agentic applications. And they're doing it with pre-made templates, with ways for potentially business oriented as opposed to technically oriented people to start to put these agentic workflows into place. And that's great. There's also a group of specialists that are building their own more custom agentic workflows. And that's a higher risk, but potentially higher reward in terms of harnessing and achieving competitive advantage by really stitching those agents into your own proprietary workflows and your own proprietary data sets.
How much autonomy are they building in at this point?
Not much at this point, but I don't think they should. In fact, agent, honestly, the notion of agent right now, the strict definition is that these are autonomous bots that are making independent decisions independently of humans and then even taking action independently of humans. I think in most cases, those agents are really a new word for copilots or even traditional software, which has been automating workflow for 30 years. They can and should be going back to humans to get approval before making a purchase, closing a transaction, and so forth. So there are very cool, inspiring visions of the future where you have armies of agents that go into these on your behalf. They transact with one another in public marketplaces and stuff. It's going to take a while to get there because you can quickly understand how complexity and risk go through the roof when you have multiple agents, each drawing myriad data sets through multiple models, start to transact with each other in an autonomous fashion. One failure could have a pretty big cascading effect. So companies can and should step cautiously into that realm and really work with strict guardrails and carefully defined use cases to start.
Yeah, it sounds like we actually need some new capabilities in the data layer to deal with agents. Do you think that's true?
I do think that's true. I think that clean inputs are a really good start. Clean outputs help from a model perspective, but you also need, for example, you can use AI to help monitor what these agents are doing. You can start to have sentiment indicators or natural language processing to understand potentially toxic output that an agent might be putting into place. You can have rules-based checks that will block transactions or actions deemed unsafe. So there is a new layer, there's a new domain, which is governance of agents. I'm actually working on a report on that topic right now.
That sounds like it's really needed. And we have at AI Realized, we have these private roundtable discussions with executives. And
Yeah.
while there's a lot of excitement about agents, there is also a lot of caution around deploying too quickly. In fact, in those discussions, I gather that the way they're thinking about agents is a little bit around the interface between existing systems. You think about the applications like their CRM, for example, or their ERP or whatever, treating those as a data repository, treating agents as a way to connect those data repositories together for action, for business automation or business processes. And then below that is the governance layer. That's the model that I'm hearing. Is that what you're hearing too?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, the goal of an agent is to orchestrate a sequence of tasks based on a decision they've made, based on their own reflections about prior decisions. And those tasks ideally are going to leverage existing software. And if you look at companies that are based on SAP or Oracle and are using structured data with these functional models such as CRM or supply chain management, a lot of that data is in pretty good shape to drive decisions. And a lot of the applications are already putting out pretty rich content. And so you could start to see how you could string together reasonable tasks that with human oversight can connect the dots and help humans automate workflows, whether it's for a mortgage application, invoice processing, a lot of things like that. A lot of the drudgery for human teams, for finance teams, starts to go away and free up those workers to do more innovative things.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we really heard two main use cases in the Agents at Work roundtable. One was connecting these systems together, so the interfaces between systems, and the other was relieving toil, these drudgery jobs that everybody hates, and that frankly are not a good use of the company's time for having high-paid people doing these very low-level roles. But let's zoom out a
Yes.
little bit to the executive leadership side. So organizations are going to soon be competing against AI native companies that have a fundamentally different economic underpinning. They may also have a different economic model for how they're selling their capabilities. How do you envision enterprises responding to that?
Good question. Our survey findings to date are that organizations, enterprises prefer to work with existing trusted vendors. They might have a bias towards that. There's always a group of risk-taking companies, usually on the younger side, born in the cloud and so forth, that are going to bet the business and be more willing to work with startups and so forth. But I think the first good news is that a lot of companies are willing to work with existing vendors. I think that the goal should be to make incremental changes to existing processes and not try to rip and replace what you have. So most organizations in the Fortune 1000 have had systems in place for a very long time. They have mainframe. They got mainframe sitting on premises, and maybe they're still increasing their mainframe. And that's just one way in which a lot of the old stuff doesn't go away. It's really about layering new incremental intelligence onto the aspects of your existing data architecture that work, and then start to create a beachhead of something new and expand from there in terms of building in new technology and new architectural elements.
Do you envision that new beachhead being a new market opportunity or a new product or both? Or what do you envision that new beachhead being?
Yeah, good question. So I think that what we're finding is most organizations, and this is rightfully, the primary goal with AI at a broad level is efficiency and productivity. That's great. So take friction out of existing workflows. The next big bucket, which is a little lower, but still probably half of companies are looking to improve revenue, delight customers in new ways and so forth. And that's where you can get innovative and start to have some fun. But I think the goal with that second bucket is where you do want to start a beachhead, you want to have a project, a sandbox project, have innovative people start to experiment, and you want to have smart people, smart employees that are betting any outputs before they start to take it into the wild with customers. If you can achieve something at limited scale that's promising, then you can start to look at how to scale it into the rest of the business. And some of those early use cases can be devising new customer interactions, assisting customer service agents in the background, giving them new information that they can, on a human basis, use to upsell or cross-sell workers, use to give them discounts and maybe escalate problems that where there's clearly a customer sentiment problem. There's definitely a lot of upside, at least from the organization perspective, on software development. You can really improve the productivity of your programmers, especially mid-level and senior level folks, by giving them Gen AI tools. So those are some of the early use cases that I think can be very promising. You get that beachhead of success and you increase from there.
But aren't you hearing from executives some reticence to go to production with their pilot use cases, even in some of those areas that you just described? And if so, what do you think the underlying reason for that reticence is?
Yeah, I think there's hesitation. Rightfully, innovations always take time. We've known that since the 1800s when we first had the internal combustion engine or other aspects, early aspects of the Industrial Revolution. Companies need to think hard about the risks to their environments. They struggle when you move from limited or lower scale production to higher scale production. It's usually because they did have initially some clean data inputs that were good for a given department or a given data type. And as they start to go more broad, they find that the additional data that's coming in is not as clean and requires some real work. So that's one challenge. Another is that you can have a sandbox project that has the most innovative workers, the folks that are comfortable using AI. Maybe they're younger, they have less baggage and so forth, but making the rest of your organization, encouraging them to use AI responsibly can be a real hurdle. Those are two things. I think that a third issue, which is becoming a concern and will be more of one going forward, is that AI inference costs, while they're coming down sharply, could still be a significant surprise cost, similar to cloud usage costs, where you get that surprisingly high bill at the end of the month. So as you go broad and you have a lot of humans in your organization that are consuming AI, and you've got those token usage costs for each unit of data consumed, that can drive up costs in surprising ways, and organizations need to figure out how to govern that.
Yeah, obviously, organizations don't like surprises of any type. In fact, at the
Yes.
Economics of AI Roundtable, we heard the opposite, which was they piloted the project and had X inference cost, which was supported by the impact of the use case. But when they deployed, the cost plummeted and their ROI skyrocketed. And so
That's
it was a
good.
pleasant surprise, but it was still a surprise. And
Yeah.
that's unnerving, especially when as a executive, your part of your job is to create an environment that's consistent and dependable that people can operate against. That kind of uncertainty is unnerving. So that's a big thing that came out of the discussion, was that there is a hesitation based on the uncertainty of the risk. That not just the financial risk, not just the customer risk, not just the data risk, but the overall risk of disruption. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that companies, executives are being a little more forthright about what they don't know. And this is good, identifying unknown unknowns. And one of the things they're saying is we don't know how much we're going to be able to automate current human work. So that's one risk. But there's also the level of disruption about how they engage with customers. If you look at Accenture, their stock is down right now because a lot of their clients are starting to, on the margin, say, you know what, I'm going to ask ChatGPT for some pretty rich advice. I'm going to have some smart people start to interact with these tools, start to go to their sources of information and so forth. And for my $20 a month or whatever it is, I'm going to get some pretty solid advice, and that's going to defer my need to hire Accenture on some strategic consulting. So there are different ways in which companies are starting to worry about more existential risk to their business. We should also recognize, and I am maybe a little controversial in my view, that I think there should be some regulation of these model outputs at this point. If you look at what happened with Grok last week, that was a pretty spectacular governance problem, potentially caused by Elon Musk himself because he adjusted some things. And you had a model that was encouraging millions of people on a public social media platform to attack and harm an individual. And that governance thing ran wild. So I think companies that were planning to put Grok into a customer service workflow, you should think real hard about toxic content. And Grok's just the most spectacular blow up lately. There are other cases in which OpenAI had to roll back a version update because they were being too sycophantic and thereby reinforcing user bias when they were asking for toxic content. So there are a lot of ways in which these models need some work. And that kind of disruption to your trusted customer relationships, your relationships with the public, is creating a lot of justified caution among executives.
Yeah, for sure. Data, which is, of course, a huge asset for companies that's not on their balance sheet. They also have their own internal intelligence, how they do things, how they think, how they operate, their culture, things like that. So they have internal intelligence, what Paul Beyer at GA Insights likes to call own your own intelligence. You should have a model for doing that,
I like
a
that.
way in which you own your own intelligence. And that, of course, is a useful way to spark the conversation about whether your model should be trained on your data, whether you should be using a private model or a isolated model, or you should be using a public model. When you're talking with executives, is this a hot topic or is it a settled subject?
It's a good question. I think it's nothing settled yet in this space in a lot of ways, but there is recognition. So the way I view it, we're in our third stage already of the AI and the Gen AI boom. First one is thought knowledge workers starting to use ChatGPT, so forth. Second stage is they're using these models within commercial tools like Joule within SAP and GitHub Copilot and so forth. The third phase is where adopters can actually get some competitive advantage because they're applying language models to their own proprietary data and their own proprietary processes. So that's where you could uncover real sustainable competitive advantage rather than productivity gains that anyone can achieve. And what I see as a common pattern is organizations putting in place a lot of the large models, but very carefully architecting RAG workflows, retrieval augmented generation, where you retrieve the right content from your own proprietary data. You use it to augment the user prompt, thereby the Gen AI model is more likely to generate a response that's accurate, safe, and so forth. So I think using a public model with RAG underneath is emerging as a common pattern for companies that want to safely apply the most powerful intelligence to their specific workflows.
If you could wave your magic wand and have every enterprise operating in an ideal mode with AI, what would we see in their infrastructure and in their operational model, and how long do you think it'll take us to get there?
Yeah, good question. So I think that I would encourage executives at the CEO level to have delegate to an executive sponsor just below that, chief data officer, chief AI officer, and then maybe chief operating officer, and have them build a tiger team of folks from within the data team, so data engineering leaders, the AI team, data science leaders, and the developer team, get leaders from those groups to work with specific parts of the business. And it should really all start with the business, where you've got the a certain line of business in a certain region, a certain product group, and so forth, that's helping identify points of pain today. What hurts today? Where is there too much friction in the system, too much manual work? And if you can have this tiger team go in and identify ways to ease that pain, they shouldn't rush to say that Gen AI is always the answer. It might not be. It might be traditional ML. It might be other things. But start with pain identified within the business, and then have this tiger team of data, AI, and developer people devise solutions to address that on a limited scale. That's what I advise as a way to get started. It does take time to go to full production, and that's okay.
So 3 years from now, will we still have someone reporting to the CEO who is leading the coordination of AI across the enterprise and isolated teams that are deploying within the departments? Or do you envision there being a more integrated system?
I think we'll still have that individual. That individual is a good person. I was struck that Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, took the head of AI and pulled her out of tech, out of it. So she's head of data and AI. She doesn't report to the CIO. She reports directly to him and the president. There are ways in which organizations are getting creative about making sure that AI has a centralized function and a leader who reports directly to the CEO. Another interesting move was from Moderna, who promoted their chief HR officer to manage AI and manage IT. And that's, I think, another equally creative look to, at the executive level, figure out how your people work with robots.
And an acknowledgement that's a critical part of the success of being able to leverage this technology, unlike previous technologies.
Exactly.
Um, so you work with a lot of executives and boards to understand how to chart a path forward. What
Yeah.
is the most critical leadership skill that you find you need in advising them about AI that maybe is different than when you were advising primarily about data?
Oh, good question. So I was an economics minor. I actually, in grad school, I taught econ macroeconomics to a lot of younger folks. And I think that it's really important to keep the business perspective, especially now. And yes, AI is new and unprecedented in many ways, but there are so many lessons of history that apply here. And then I think that executives should be aware of that at the end of the day, and I've said this in other forums, the goal is to increase the value that each worker delivers in a given hour. That's why we're better off than our grandparents, they're better off than their grandparents, and so forth. And if you look at prior Big Bang innovations, the internal combustion engine and so forth, powerful stuff that got unleashed, but it took decades to really transform incrementally how people go about their lives and their work. And so, in a good year, we'll boost our productivity, the value of economic output per worker hour, by say 3-4% in a year. It actually went down last quarter. So we're in early innings. We have lot of way to do, a lot of way to go. But I think what I try to do is remind executives that yes, the tech is fascinating. Maybe this time is different. It's probably faster more than anything else because of the power of the models and the cost of inference. Power of models going up, cost of inference going down. So it's a transition that's happening faster, but there are lessons from history about figuring out how to safely apply these powerful models to your own complex ways of doing business. And being incremental and methodical is the way to do it.
So anchoring them in economics and history as a way to understand how to chart a path forward. Is that fair?
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
Don't
good.
get
All right.
too dizzy about the power of what Grok or these other things are handing to you. Take a pragmatic look at your existing business and figure out how to enhance it.
Any other thoughts you want to leave executives with on this podcast?
I think this is a great point to reemphasize the need to train people. As I said, human skill gaps are identified as the number 2 obstacle to AI success in our research. Number 1 is data quality. Invest in your people. Help them use AI and use it to augment their work. And for young people out there, AI is an incredible opportunity in data science, maybe not strict computer coding, but there are a lot of ways in which organizations need to use AI to their advantage so that they can double down on the advantages that don't change, which is humans' relationships, the power of brands, and the power of trust.
Wow, very well said. If people want to learn a little bit more about you or BARC, what should they do?
Thank you for asking. That's great. I'm on LinkedIn, pretty active there, promoting our research, engaging with our user community to unpack trends. We also have barc.com, BARC.com, where we publish our research, and I'm privileged to work with some very smart folks on a lot of the reports that we publish.
Great. Kevin Petrie, VP of Research at BARC, thank you so much for joining me today on AI Realized.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it.
AI.